Welcome to yesterlore. Hello. I am a few minutes late. I am aware of this. I was having some trouble setting up OBS tonight, making sure all the settings were okay. Some things got bumped around the last time I used OBS, so had to get those back to our yesterlore settings, and getting all the windows sized is always a challenge a little bit. I'm slowly getting better at it, but it's still kind of new for me. Hello, I see there's someone in the chat. Welcome. So tonight, we're actually just going to go ahead and continue from where we left off last time. Last time, we finished this stanza up here about this rune, which in the rune poem is labeled Tyr. If we look at Hicks's facsimile over here, I can turn these little things off here. We'll see here is the stanza we looked at last time. And there is one thing I actually wanted to discuss about this stanza that I brought up last time a little bit, but there's like another note I wanted to add. So this poem, if you remember, this specific poem about this specific rune, talks about a sign or a token that always holds true with people, with princes specifically is the word that's used, avalingas, but we know that poetically it's often just a way to say people, and that it's ever on a journey. It's always with these people on a journey over the shadow of night, or the shadows of night, and it never falters. And we talked about how just looking at the meaning of the poem, that the likely answer, if we're treating this like a riddle, the likely meaning for this rune is some kind of star, like the North Star, Polaris, or something like that. And that's what a lot of scholars think. However, the word Tyr means glory. It's one of there's quite a few words in Old English that mean glory, but it's one of the words that seems to mean glory. Now, maybe metaphorically, glory holds true with people on a journey and never falters over the shadow of night. There's definitely a metaphorical way to make that make sense. But the other sort of signpost to the meaning of this being star-related this is sort of ancillary to the poem, that the word taken here, that means token, taken, and also when you use, I think the other word is like farda, which means like a journey, but particularly taken, it's often used in reference to like zodiac signs. When we see other Old English texts, especially prose, talking about constellations and that sort of thing, it's often used in that context. So it has potentially those connotations of having to do with stars, and stars make more sense. And what I said last time is that this rune, which also appears in the Old Norse rune poems, the Old Icelandic and the Old Norwegian rune poems, this rune appears similar in the Younger Futhark, unless you're looking at the sort of later Younger Futhark, where it's usually more of just this half. It looks kind of like a 7 that slants down. Like the first half, they don't have this little sort of, not quite descender, but diagonal line on the right side. In some of the later Younger Futhark runic inscriptions that we see from Old Norse. But in any case, the Old Norse rune systems have this rune, and they call this rune Tyr. And in Old Norse, Tyr is the god Tyr. We usually anglicize it to Tyr. And he's a god of justice, and often called a god of war. There are some different reasons why that is. One is that he's likened to Mars when it comes to the Interpretatio Romana, it's feminine. And we see that in the name of the day of the week, Tuesday, which is sort of analogous to dies Martis, I think is what it is in Latin, if I remember correctly. So it's the day of Mars, and when Germanic peoples were trying to analogize that, they called it the day of this god. We call it Tuesday, the day of the Old English equivalent of Tyr being Tiu. Now, Tiu is, like I said, the cognate to Tyr in Old Norse. And it's possible, given that there were Old Norse speakers in England, that maybe the name here is reflecting the Old Norse name rather than the Old English name, because at least at the point when this, the original manuscript was probably written, given the dialect and the sort of form of certain words, we know that the manuscript that this was based on was late, even if some of the language implies that the poem originally might have been older, especially given the topic that it's on runes, which by the point of the manuscript were not the main writing system of Old English at all. There was probably potentially a familiarity with Old Norse pagans, because most of the Old English speakers at this point would have been Christians, and so they wouldn't have been referring to maybe their Anglo-Saxon heathen god. Maybe that is the case. Maybe this is a intentional replacement of what was earlier Tiu, but they wanted to Christianize the poem, so they replaced it with Tyr instead. Glory, because glory could maybe metaphorically still fit the stanza. Or there is another possibility that I didn't really talk about. Because we don't have the original manuscript, it's really hard to know what the original manuscript looked like. But if this name was in the original manuscript, if you look at the letter, let's look at the letter W here. Win is this letter. It looks kind of like a P. And then if you look at the R's, you'll see that if it kind of looks like maybe an R is connecting at the bottom, it could look like a W. And if it looks like a W didn't completely connect, it could look like an R. So another possibility, which I didn't bring up last time, is that potentially the original manuscript said Tiu here. And maybe it just was always Tiu, and it still said Tiu, but George Hicks, when copying it into his book, didn't catch that, or maybe it was difficult to read because of maybe the scribe's handwriting or something. We don't have the scribe's handwriting because we don't have the copy, unfortunately. So that is just another possibility I wanted to bring up, that maybe it did say Tiu, but the W was misread for an R, which you can kind of see how it's possible to do, especially if it's difficult to read handwriting. So that's all I wanted to add to that stanza. So it could be the star Polaris, which may or may not be associated with the god Tiu. His name, I think I mentioned last time, comes from an Indo-European word for sky, so him being related to stars might make sense as well. It could also just be glory, but I think just given the context, I tend to lean towards it probably is a star that's being referred to here, and that may or may not ancillarily be referring to something associated with the god Tiu. But at the point when the manuscript was written, they weren't probably thinking in those terms because of Christianity. So that's my personal opinion, but it's undecided. It's one of the many mysteries about this poem that we're not sure about, just by nature of the ambiguity that comes with it being old, it being in Old English, there being multiple layers of culture, Christian, pagan, the manuscript history, and particularly the fact that we don't have the manuscript because it burnt in the fire. There's all these factors that make this poem very enigmatic. And the fact that it's runes in general. We've talked about some of the difficulty with runology a little bit. So we're going to just continue now, finally, to the next stanza. Now, this stanza is interesting. This is one that I don't think is as easy to guess unless you're really... No, I don't think it's guessable even if you are interested in the topic that relates to this, this thing that this word relates to. But there is a related word in English, and you can see there's a link there because I'm going to link to a picture once we talk about what this rune means. So I'm going to go ahead and read it in Old English, and then we will start to break down some of the vocabulary in here and I will translate, and then I'll talk about, I don't think we'll have a guessing, unless people want to try to guess. We won't probably have a guessing portion for this particular rune. We might have one for the next one. I think the next one would probably be pretty easy to, not easy, but possible to guess. Maybe easy. We'll see. So, this stanza, let me go ahead and read it in Old English. Beorc with bleda las. I'm going to start over. Beorc with bleda las. Bereth evna swath thach tanas putan tuder. Bithon telgum uliti. Hach on helma christed fire. Yaloded lavum. Lifte yatenja. I'm not super happy with how that was read. I'm like hypercritical of my accent right now. And the way that things are spelled in this one is really throwing me off. Now, you'll probably notice I already changed something based on what's written here, if you're following along with the text. There's an emendation that's typically made to this stanza, and it's right here. I read this as ha, or at least I hope I did. I might have pronounced it a little bit differently, but it should be ha with an H. And the reason for that is that tha here, which we've had before, it's also right up here spelled with an eth. Either way it's pronounced tha. It means like though or but, depending on the sort of grammatical context. It's where we get the word though in modern English. Though just doesn't really make grammatical sense here, first of all. And that's one argument that's been made for why this should be changed to H. Whether or not this is an original mistake by the scribe or a Hicks mistake has been argued. I don't think there's a certain way to know, but if you look at the way that his thorns look and the way that his H's look, you can see how it's, if you don't see the descender very clearly, that's here and thorn, it might be possible to mistake an H for a thorn. Maybe there was sort of a smudge underneath the H, and he read that as a thorn. Now, metrically, it does work to have thach here, like in terms of the rhythm for purposes of poetry. However, an H would also be better for the alliteration, because the alliteration in this line, if I were to like put this into poetic lines, which I typically don't because we typically read from the manuscript, but if I were to put this into poetic lines, it actually might be interesting to do for this, just for fun. But I'd probably want to blow up beorc here. Maybe not, maybe later. Maybe when we're done with the poem, I'll go back and put these into metrical lines as I understand them. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement on where the line breaks are, but just because of the rules of Anglo-Saxon poetry being pretty well understood, there's definitely still debates about it and still scholarship written, but at least the basics of where a line begins and ends it's often pretty clear. But the alliteration in this line is on H, so it's if it's thach on helme risted fire, that would be the line. And the half line break would be right here. So I'm going to go ahead and bold this. At least show what this line is. This is the poetic, like the metrical line. I know the R's and S's and F's and D's look weird when I bold this particular font, but this is the best font for these kinds of symbols that I've been able to find in Google Fonts, so we're just going to have to live with it. Also, Google Fonts does not support the runes, or at least most of them, so I actually have to use a different font. I'm using Noto Sans for the runes. Anyways, Thach on Helma, actually I'm going to change this back to what Hicks has. Thach on Helma, Risted Fire is metrically sound, with the H being the alliteration. Now, just a rough refresher on the rules. We've never gone completely into the rules. If people would like me to, I would love to do a stream where I explain the rules of Anglo-Saxon alliterative verse, since we've looked at so much. But quick refresher. On one half, the first half of the alliterative line, you can have either one or two instances of the alliterating letter. And the alliterating letter, when I say that, I mean on a stressed syllable that is one of the primary 4 beats. Each line has 4 beats. There should be like 4 main stresses. You can have some minor stresses, but the 4 main stresses are where you want to look for the alliteration. So there's 2 on one side and 2 on the other. On the first half, you can either have both or one of the first half lines lifts, as we call them, like the stressed syllables, primary stressed syllables, with the alliterating letter. If it's Thachon Helma, it's just one. Usually, if it's just one, it's the second one, because it's like more immediate in your mind when you go to the next half line. In my experience, most of them are on the second of the lifts, if it's only on one. There's probably exceptions to that, but in my experience, from what I've read, it's usually on this second lift. And in the second half line, only the first lift can have the alliteration. The last lift, which here is on this syllable fa, fayere is this word, which means fair. We'll get to that, but yeah, it means fair. Like fair isn't beautiful, or pretty or nice looking. It can't have an H. You cannot have an H here because H is the alliterating line. We have helma and we have hristed. So H is the alliteration. So this F cannot alliterate. This whatever is in this slot in the fourth place cannot alliterate. And we can see this in the next line here. I'll highlight this half line and italicize it. You can see how weird the font looks italicized now. Here, yeloded lavom lyfte yetenje. You'll see the lifts are lo, la, lif, and ten. And so you'll see the alliterations on L. It's on L thrice. So yeah, we have both here. Loden, yeloden, leavom, lifta, and then yetenje. The T here cannot alliterate. But here is an example where you have both of the lifts on the first half line alliterating. I'm trying to see if there's an example where not both are. Yeah, no, I think in this stanza all of them are twice in the first half line. Yeah, beorc with bleda, bleda las, bereth evneswa. That's the first half line. Or that's the first line. Evneswa thar. Tanas butan tuder. Tanas and tuder are the first half line. Bithon telgum uliti. And telgum is the second half line. It's lift. It alliterates. Uliti does not alliterate. And we have Thachon Helma, which would be like a departure from the rest of the stanza. So just for all those reasons, metrically this could be a thach, but grammatically when we start translating, it's not going to make sense as thach. So people will replace this with an H, which is nice and has double alliteration in the first half line. And I think that's the only emendation to this stanza. In terms of the manuscript editing kind of thing. Now let's get into the translation. I know it's been a while and I still haven't gotten into the translation yet. So, beorc, whatever that is, bith bleda las. So bleda in more sort of standard West Saxon, this would be probably blada. Although it could be bleda, arguably. I think we had this argument about blade elsewhere. Mayhaps. We might have. But blade here, this is the genitive of bleda las. Las means without. It's where we get less from. Like less as in the suffix, like less. So it's whatever this is, less. As in not having this. And this is a genitive plural, so it's of these things. And these things, blade, probably fruit. As in what grows from something. I just realized I can remove this bar here and give us more space. But that actually pushed us off the page. There we go. Bledalas. Actually, I'm going to move us. Whoop, not what I wanted. I wanted to do this. Reveal more of the page. There we go. And scroll back down. Okay. Blade basically means like the fruits of something, like the product of growth from a plant. But I think in this context we can read it a little bit more literally, like fruit, as in delicious sort of bearer of fruit offspring, or of plant offspring, yeah. Because we're saying that this thing is fruitless. It doesn't have fruit. Bereth evneswa tha tanas butan tuder. So bereth means it bears. It bears evna swa fach. So evna swa is the direct ancestor to even so. It bears even so, thach, and the thach here is more like meaning but, or we can kind of put it more closely to the beginning of the phrase if we're trying to translate. We could say, though, even so, it bears, or but it bears even so. We can translate it in different ways, but that's what the function of the thach there is. It's contradicting the prior statement. Even so kind of already does that, but the thach is more emphasis because it's a poem and because we need another long lift. Now, swa could be the long lift, but I think thach here is where the last lift is. Bereth evna swa thach. It bears even though, it bears even so. What does it bear? Tanas butan tudder. Now this tudder is a bit weird. It might be the strange dialect, like late dialect and some other dialect influence on the dialect that's being written in. Usually this word is tudor with a long U, but I think here it's probably short with a double D. Tudder. Tudder. And tudder is another word, or tudor more standardly, is another word for fruit, or like that which grows more generally. And tanas here, tan is a twig or a branch. It's actually, tan is the origin of the toe in mistletoe. Mistletoe, it's misteltan, and mistel is mistletoe, actually in Old English. And then the tan part just means a twig, because you usually have a twig of mistletoe. So the mistletoe is a toe of mistletoe. Mistletoe being the plant, the toe part meaning twig. So it's one of those sort of like words that's kind of redundant in its own name. So tan can mean a branch or a twig. Here probably branch, because we're talking about something that doesn't bear fruit. Could be twigs, but twigs don't always bear fruit, usually anyway, unless they're like small berries or something. We can quibble about that. Once we know the answer, I think that whether this should be branch or twig will be clearer. But it bears, even so, twigs, butan, tudor. And butan means sort of like about, as in around. But it can also, and more typically here when it's written like this, butan, or buton with an O sometimes, it means without. And I think that's what's happening here, is it's the preposition without, of which tudder is the object in, like, I think an accusative case here. I think tanas is also accusative because it's the object of bereth. So far we've got beorc is fruitless, though it bears even so branches without fruit, or twigs without fruit. I think branches makes more sense. I'm just going to say that. For fruit, I think branches makes more sense. Again, unless you're talking about berries or something. Let's continue. Bith on telgum buliti. I just realized this is still italicized. And bolded, wow. Bith on telgum buliti. So, bith, we're familiar with that. It means is, in a more sort of static or eternal truth kind of sense. Bith on telgum uliti. Uliti means, and you can see it's just kind of broken off onto the next line. I'm just reading from one line to the next because that's what manuscripts do. And I think Hicks was just trying to replicate that here in his write-up of it. He just was like, you know what? If it breaks off, I'm going to break off. Although he puts a dash there. It's a little bit more common for books. But manuscripts don't do that, so I'm not doing it. Bith on telgum uliti. And uliti, I was about to say, means beautiful. It is beautiful on telgum. Telg here, telg means a bough, like the bough of a plant. Again, that's why I'm leaning branch word as well here. It is beautiful in boughs. This is the dative, so it's in boughs or on its boughs, something like that. It's beautiful in its boughs. And then if this is hach, it's hach on helma, christed fire. So it's high in its helm. Risted fire. And I think these are just descriptions of the helm. Because fire, I think, is also in the dative, which is what helm is in, I believe. Unless helm is feminine. It might be. No, it's not. It's masculine. I just remembered, yeah. Helm is masculine, so fire has to be dative here, grammatically. So it is high in its fair, beautiful. Actually, I would say that this isn't directly an adjective on helm, because if this were an adjective, this would be faerum, I think, in the dative singular. Yeah, it would. So I think this is actually more of an adverb of like beautifully, fairly. And it's fairly what? Fairly christed. And christed means adorned. It's high and it's fairly adorned helm, which kind of just continues off from the it's beautiful in its bows. High on its beautifully adorned or fairly adorned helm. And then we have that it is yeloden lavum lifte yetenje. So it is yeloden, and this is the ancestor of the word laden, L-A-D-E-N. It's laden. It's loaded. It's related to load as well, although it's not quite the same as loaded. It basically means loaded. Laden, yeloden, lavum. And this is probably a instrumental plural use of the dative plural here. And when I say instrumental, it's basically just like with lav. Lav means leaf. It's where leaf comes from. You can see it's actually spelled just like leaf. So it's laden with leaves. Leaves, sorry. Laden with leaves. Has lots of leaves. Lifta yetenja. Now we've had this word yetenja before in this poem, I believe. You might have to go back a few weeks to see that, but yetenja has to do with like grabbing, lifting, or reaching something. And here I would say reaching, because, and it's like an adjective, lift is the air. And it's, I think lift is, I can't remember if it's feminine or masculine. Yeah, I think it has to be one of the two, because in Proto-Germanic it's luftis, and that's why it's lifte. Lifte. I think it's luftis, which has to be either masculine or feminine. I can't remember which of the two it is. In either case, it's like reaching. Either it's reaching the air or reaching towards the air. How I would translate it depends on, I think, the gender. If it's masculine, then it's definitely reaching towards the air. If it's feminine, it could be reaching towards the air or reaching the air. It's more ambiguous if it's feminine just because of how the cases work when it's feminine. In either case, reaching towards the air. So it's laden with leaves reaching towards the air. In either case, that's how I would translate it. So let's go over the entire thing again. Sorry, I just need to take care of something real quick. All right. So, let me read it through one more time, and then I'll talk about the answer, like what it means. So we've got beorc with bleda las, bereth evne swathach, tana sputan tuder, with on telgum liti, hachon helme risted fire, yeloden lavum, lifte yetenja. The beorc is fruitless, though it bears even so branches without fruit. It is beautiful on its boughs, or in its boughs, high in its fairly adorned helm. Like canopy maybe is a good way to translate helm here. Yeloden lavum, laden with leaves, reaching the sky. So, if anyone has a guess of what this could be, it's clearly some kind of tree. So if you're really into botany, I still don't know if this is guessable, what kind of tree this is. it's a tree that doesn't bear fruit, and that could mean a lot of things. That could mean a lot of things. So I don't know if it's fair to expect a guess. But one thing I can say, it is not an evergreen tree. That is a good guess. But it's beautiful, like aesthetically beautiful, which, you know, that doesn't really help a lot because everyone has different aesthetics, but has lots of leaves. Its boughs are considered beautiful. Like its branches themselves are considered beautiful. And you can also look at the name. The name is beorc. Beorc. And the modern English name is related to this word. It's not a direct descendant of this word, but it's a direct descendant of a derivation of this word. To anyone who has no background in Old English, which is probably most of my audience, I'm not going to assume that, but all that really means too is it starts with B, maybe has an R in it. The answer, okay, so we have someone who got it. Yeah, it's birch. Technically, I've seen this translated as both birch and poplar because I've seen this word used for both birch and poplar in other Old English writings. Beorc appears to mean either birch or poplar. And I think the main difference is that, if I remember correctly, so these are poplar and these are birch, I believe. I think that's the distinction here, if I'm remembering correctly. Popular and birch. It doesn't help that like these are taken in clearly different seasons, considering how few leaves are on these. They both have lots of leaves. That's not the main distinction. I think these are like white birch, so the difference is a lot starker. I don't think all birch is white like this. I think one of the main tells, there are definitely some differences, but I think one of the big differences is that I think, I might get it backwards. I'm not a botanist. If you're a botanist and you're watching this, I'm sure you're going to be very frustrated with what I'm about to say, but I'm going to preamble this with, I can't remember which is which, but one of them can only have, produce, okay, I'm going to rephrase this. I'm not a botanist. I'm not going to speak it with authority on this. I'm just going to say one of them can produce both male and female organs to reproduce, and the other can only produce one of the two. I cannot remember which of the two when it comes to male or female organs to reproduce as a tree. I don't remember which is which, but that is one difference that I know is the case. One of them can produce both organs and one cannot. I can only produce one. I don't remember which is which, and I don't remember which of the two it is that one cannot produce. I think there are other differences. I think there are some visual differences that we can see, but I also think that the fact that one is clearly taken in another season is going to bias that a bit. I was looking for good comparison images, and I could not find very many that even compared the two side by side. So this is all I could find. Botanists, if you're watching this, please leave a comment and explain for anyone else, or if I find out the answer. Actually, I think what I'll do is in the YouTube link, I'll find an article that explains the difference between the two clearly. Now, in terms of the translation, I have seen this, usually when I've seen translations of this the rune poem as a whole, this stanza tends to be translated poplar. I don't know the reasons why they lean poplar words and not birch words, because I've seen this word used for both in other manuscripts, other things that aren't this poem. So the bias one way or another, I'm not sure, and I've never read I know there are probably pieces out there that address this, but I've never read an article that actually argued why it should be translated one way or the other. And I also know that both of the Norse rune poems, the translation is always birch. I don't think the word, the cognate actually translates poplar. I'm not sure, actually, about, the word is beorc in Old Norse, and I'm not sure if that can translate poplar. I know it translates birch, because it's always translated as birch by others. So, but the point is, it's either birch or poplar. The Norse ones are both birch. I haven't seen a reason why the Old English one should be poplar. It might just be what grows in England. That might actually be what's biasing it. I'm not sure. I'm not a botanist. Botanists, I implore you to comment. Anyways, that is this poem. That is this, what they're seeming to emphasize here is that it doesn't have fruit, but it has beautiful branches. And I think most people do agree that birch, at least, is really pretty. Like, just the kind of striped look of it, especially the white ones, where it's like a high contrast between like the dark stripes and the white bark. I think that's very beautiful, personally. And so they're emphasizing that even on poplars, I think it kind of looks a little similar, that the branches are beautiful and has lots of leaves. We'll see a similar kind of emphasis on like growth and beauty in the Old Norse poem, at least on growth, maybe not as much on beauty, but the Old Norse poems do kind of talk about a similar thing. And when I've seen people use runes for like sort of more poetic or metaphorical meaning when it comes to like using runes for divination and that kind of thing, obviously interpret this poem as you will and apply that divination as you see fit if you are using this as a guide for divination. Whatever associations you have with this poem and with this rune make the most sense for you if you're using this for divination. But what I've seen people try to like sort of write summaries for like what the poems mean to them, they often emphasize like sort of the growth aspects of this. I'm not sure that the poem exactly is emphasizing that so much as it just has a lot of leaves that are really nice to look at. But some people have talked about this rune as a symbol of growth, new growth. I don't exactly get that out of this stanza here, but I think I've seen it a lot. And I think when you look at the Old Norse rune poems, that kind of makes a little bit more sense, that interpretation of this rune. But from the Old English, emphasis on it doesn't have fruit, but it has branches that look nice and lots of leaves that reach towards the sky. Okay, let's go to the next one, and this is one of my favorite poems here. It also might be one of the easiest ones to guess. I think the rune after this could fight on that in terms of easiest, but I'm going to go ahead and read it in Old English, and then read it slowly as we translate into modern English. This is another one where the answer is in the stanza. I think we had one in the ancient Greek rune, not runes, riddles, the ancient Greek riddles, that just had the answer in the riddle. I'm going to go ahead and read it anyway, and you'll probably be able to guess it. If you can guess it before I'm even done reading the Old English, I don't know, you get a star emoji or something. A gold star, the equivalent to a gold star sticker, except you don't get to keep it, unless you, I guess, screenshot the message. So I'm going to go ahead and read. Bith for earlum adlinga win, horse hovum ulank, thar him halatha Welia on wijum wrixlath spracha, an bith unstillum avre frod. Alright, I'm going to read it one more time slowly, because I do want to see if someone can get this from the Old English before I even translate it. Okay. Bith for earlum adlinga win, horse hovum lank, thar him halatha Welia on wijum wrixlath spracha, an bith unstillum avre frod. Alright, does anyone have a guess before I go into modern English? I know it's a long shot, but maybe. I thought, maybe. I think maybe I will start translating. So, whatever this is. And I'm going to say in more standard, Old English is usually and not It's Now, we already had a rune for confusion's sake. Long this is actually a long diphthong, If I were to like notate this in sort of a more modern representation, I would put an accent or a macron on this e. Whereas this is short, and that's why it's showing up as Someone said, I heard the word horse in there. Well, what sounded like the word horse? Is that anything? Yes. Spoilers, this means horse. Eoch is another word for horse. A really cool word for like a troop, particularly a battalion of cavalry, but it doesn't have to be a battalion of cavalry, it could just be a troop of warriors, is eored. And sometimes you even see eored used to mean just a group of people. Eored, and it's usually E-O-R-O-D. I know I'd have to use these D's, but these R's, but eored. This eo here comes from eoch. What happens is the H goes away, and then this gets long in compensation. Yeah, I'm going to see if Twitch has a star emoji. I didn't actually check. Is there a star? There's no star. Okay, I'm just going to have to Unicode it. I'm sorry, let me go get a star emoji real quick. Oh wait, could I just actually type the star symbol? I can. Okay, I typed the star symbol. I'm still going to look for an emoji though. Star emoji. star emoji. Okay, here you go. Yeah, so this means horse as a spoiler, but I'm still going to try to translate the entire poem. Sorry for the noise in the background. I'm going to try to translate the entire poem. So, eoch, horse. So why are there two words for horse? Actually, there are more than two words for horse. I'll talk about the word for horse in a bit. It's not letting me post the emoji. This is strange. Oh, there we go. It says chat pause due to scroll. There we go. There we go. There's the emoji. Okay. A horse. Bith on eorlum athalinga win. A horse is for eorl. Eorlum is the dative plural of eorl. And we've had this word before. It means noble. It's where the word earl comes from. But noble. And I think here, I think it is actually noble, because we also have athalinga after. Athalinga and athaling we've talked about. That word also means prince. So it's of princes, win. And win we've had before, where there was actually a rune win. It was spelled win, but usually it's spelled win with a Y. And I think etymologically it should have two N's, not one. But there's no standard spelling in Old English. It means joy. We had a rune that meant joy, win. So a horse is for nobles a joy. The joy of princes, or the joy of people. You know, we can go with the sort of poetic use of nobility to mean anyone. We've seen enough formulae where that happens to justify that potentially. But I think the two back-to-back words for nobility kind of put me towards. They're probably talking about nobles because it took assets to have a horse. Horses were associated with more wealthy individuals, so I think that makes a bit more sense there. So a horse is for nobles, the joy of princes. Hors hovum lank means, this is actually fun, lank means proud. Proud. And horse is horse. Again, this is just a stanza that tells you what it means. Horse, the horse is proud. Proud in its hovum. Hov means hoof, where hoof comes from. And it's plural, dative plural here, this here. So it's in its hooves. Proud in its hooves. In its hooves, proud. Tharhim hathala, or sorry, Tharhim halatha imb. Now, this is where the translation gets a little bit tricky, and where some people will actually amend this E here, grammatically. So, thad here, thad can mean, well, thad is where the word there comes from, but it's also, unlike modern English, a relative pronoun. It has the function that where does, when where is not a question. Pride right down to the hooves. Yeah, so true. Thank you, chat. That's a really great comment. We'd hope a horse would be proud right down to its hooves. Proud in its hooves. Where, so it means where. It has that function of where, not in terms of a question where, that's where, with a HW, but where as a sort of relative pronoun. So, proud in its hooves, where, ... that kind of where. In Old English, they use there for that. And you'll find that in Old English in general, where we use sort of WH words as relative pronouns. Old English will use the thorn/eth words that become TH words in modern English instead. Now, the issue here, I think it'll be clearer when we continue to translate, I think. We've had the word haleth before. Haleth means like a hero or a warrior. Now, haletha here could mean a couple things. On its face, this is the dative singular of haleth, which implies that it's towards the hero, or for the hero, or by the hero if it's an instrumental use of the dative, or there's some kind of preposition governing it. Now, imp here is not governing haleth. I think every translator agrees. Imb is governing him. Upon him. so the horse upon, impir means like about or upon. So a horse proud in its hooves when upon him hero. Okay, so there's sort of two things that people do with this. What they'll do is they'll, some translators have gotten rid of the E. There's like, this E is a mistake, and it just shouldn't be there. And they've made it haleth. So it's like, there, or sorry, where a hero upon him, ... Others have amended this to a plural, halathas, which would mean when heroes upon him, ... Now, some people might argue, I'm not sure if I've seen anyone argue this, but there are some sort of words that are masculine plurals of sort of groups of people, particularly like if it's a specific word for like a tribe or an ethnic group, that where the typical plural for masculine strong nouns in Old English is as. It's where the S plural modern English comes from. It's as in Old English. That sometimes, you actually see that in tanas here for twigs or branches. Usually it would be halethas if this were plural. But there are some sort of like words for groups of people. Example is engle for the Engles, or Saxe for the Saxons, for example, or I think of an example, Ylva or Ylva for the elves. Those are sort of group words that where the plural is an E, and that some people might argue that this is like a weird poetic dialectal thing where that's what this is. Now, for a common word like haleth, at least a common in poetry, it's not the most common word, but it's common in poetry to see this word haleth for hero. This would be atypical, even in poetry, to have this kind of weird plural. Some people think that this is an error influenced by this word here, welia, and I will explain why that might be the case. Here, welia on wijam urixlet spracha. Welia here means sort of like rich, like wealthy, and it modifies what appears to be a plural. Here, this is like this E here implies that it is welia. This is another going on to the next line. Weli is sort of like wealthy. Weli. Wel is sort of prosperity, basically. So like prosperous, wealthy. Heroes, that makes sense. And it would be wealthy heroes who would have horses. But this E here on welia implies that this should be plural. Whoa, oops, I accidentally dragged that. This word haleth should be plural. So it should be halethas. And I've seen the argument that maybe the sort of anticipating of the E here made the scribe accidentally write the E here. Or maybe made Hicks accidentally write the E there. We can't know. But most people will amend this to a plural in either case. So I'm going to go ahead and put halethas here. I think it is possible to have like the weird dialectal argument here. Maybe there's a synonymous word of a different declension, like a rare word. Or maybe this is, for some reason, in a different gender than it typically is, because a feminine plural could have an E there, potentially. I think that depends on the declension. It could be an O or a U. Or if it's neuter, it could be an O or a U. In any case, I tend to just leave it there, even understanding that it should be plural. But that's an important note, though. So when it comes to translating this, a horse proud in its hooves, where wealthy heroes upon him, wealthy heroes on wijum. Now, wij means a steed. It's basically your ride that's alive. Any animal that you're riding that's alive. 99.9% of the time, that's horses in Anglo-Saxon England. So it basically is another word for horse. We have horse, we have elk, and now we have wij. But wij has more of the sense of steed. Horse as it is acting in its job of being your vehicle. So unwijum, on steeds. So on their wealthy heroes, on their steeds, Wrixlath spracha. Now, Wrixlath is one of my favorite words. Wrixlan means to exchange, and sprach is speech. So they exchange speech, they exchange words upon their steeds. So let me go back to the beginning of this. So a horse is for nobles, the joy of princes. A horse, proud in its hooves, where upon him heroes, wealthy, on their steeds, exchange speech. And bith unstillum avre frover. And it is, the horse, is avre, ever, always, frover, a comfort. We've had this word before, frover. Unstillum. And so this is a dative clause, so it's to the unstill. Unstillum. The restless. So the horse is for nobles, a joy of princes. Horse proud in its hoofs, where upon him the wealthy heroes exchange words upon their steeds. And it is always a comfort to the restless. Because I guess even then, in Anglo-Saxon England, there was some kind of recognition that horses can have a calming effect. Just having a horse, maybe, is a comfort. You don't have to walk all the way. Although riding a horse can be uncomfortable in other ways. But also just having a horse as a companion, I think, since horses were domesticated, that's been a thing people have recognized. Sort of therapeutic nature of having a horse. So this is one of my favorite, I think I said one of my favorite stanzas, because it's just about whoever the poet who composed the rune poem being a horse person, and liking horses, and I think it's nice. Especially this last part. It's always a comfort to unstill anyone who needs calming. Horses can be calming. They also might be terrifying to you, but this poem isn't really addressing that. I just think it's nice. So it's already time for me to be done. We only got through 2 stanzas, but I did have a considerable sort of backtrack on this tier because there was more I wanted to go over with this one. It is an enigmatic stanza for sure. So we only got through 2 more today. I was hoping to get to Man today, but we'll get to that next week. We still have a few. If you look ahead, we have, let's see, how many more runes do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think we could probably get through a lot of these a lot more quickly next time. We'll at least, I know, get to Ing, but I have a lot to say about Ing. And I have a bit to say about Edel to return to some topics we talked about before. But I also think these last ones might go a little bit quicker than some of the ones we've already done. So I'm hopeful that we'll finish in the next couple weeks with the Old English rune poem. Then we'll get to either, I think it will depend on what kind of audience feedback I get, whether I should go straight into the other rune poems, or if I should do something in between the rune poems, maybe a different yesterlore topic, or back to a conlang with me type thing, because it's been a while since I've done a conlang thing. The last conlang thing was just kind of thrown out there and didn't get very far. But maybe a return to the conlang with me conlang we were working on before, like a check-in after the Old English rune poem, or maybe a new conlang project. Or a break from the Old English, but still yesterlore. Some other topic. I know I want to do some Gothic stuff. I want to do... I've had someone recommend Sanskrit at some point. Something in Sanskrit might be fun. Or I could challenge myself maybe and do something in Hittite. I'm still learning cuneiform, Hittite cuneiform, but Hittite's really interesting to me, so I might want to do something with that as well. So we'll see what comes. I do want to hear from people, so after this goes up onto YouTube in the next couple of hours, it'll be commentable. I just want to remind people that there is a YouTube companion to this Twitch where these streams get uploaded to afterwards. So if you want to leave comments on that, that would be a good way to let me know. Or if you actually have my contact, I think I have a link to ways to contact me, or at least one way to contact me on Twitch and on YouTube. There should be, and if there's not, I'm going to add add a way to contact me, so you can let me know directly as well. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm going to let you go. We're a few minutes over, so I hope you all have a good rest of your time zone, and thank you for watching.